Deserts are supposed to be empty, silent, lifeless. But what if I told you they remember everything? The footsteps, the whispers, the screams buried beneath the sand, none of it disappears. In tonight's episode, I'll take you into the world's most terrifying deserts, where mirages aren't illusions, and the sand hides more than just bones. From a glowing man in the Mojave, to eyes carved beneath the raw salt plains, to laughter echoing from a pit that was never supposed to be found. These aren't myths. They're real encounters, and they've never been fully explained. But I warn you, once you start listening, the desert may start listening back. So dim the lights and don't look out your window. These are 7 very scary true desert horror stories. You won't forget. The Man in White, Mojave Desert. California, it was 2016. Jake, a 28-year-old photographer, was traveling alone to the Mojave Desert in California to capture time-lapse footage of the stars. He parked miles off the highway, far from any cell signal, determined to get the perfect shot. Around 2:30 a.m., as he was reviewing his footage, he saw movement on the horizon, a figure walking toward him in the pitch-black night. The man was dressed in white, glowing slightly under the moonlight. Jake called out, thinking maybe it was another camper. No response. The figure kept coming. Slowly, steadily. Uneasy, Jake packed his gear, but when he looked up again, the man was gone. Relieved, he turned back to his car, but the passenger door was wide open. Jake hadn't unlocked it. Heart racing, he slammed the door shut, got in, and started the engine. Just as the headlights flicked on, there he was again, the man in white, standing inches from the front bumper, eyes wide, face blank. Jake floored it, swerving around the figure and driving straight until he hit the main road. When he got to a gas station hours later, he checked the footage. There was no sign of the man. But on the final frame, right before he packed up, a voice whispered, "Don't leave." Jake never returned to the desert again. Screams on the sand. Empty quarter, Saudi Arabia in 2019. An oil field engineer named Khalid was stationed deep in the Rub Al Khali, also known as the Empty Quarter, one of the largest deserts in the world. During a routine maintenance night shift, Khalid and 2 co-workers heard screams echoing across the dunes. Thinking someone was lost or hurt, they grabbed flashlights and followed the sound. They walked nearly half a mile from camp, but the screams kept shifting directions, as if they were being led somewhere. Eventually, they reached an old, abandoned well. The sound stopped. One of the men, curious, looked inside and immediately began to scream and convulse, as if something had entered his mind. They dragged him back to camp, and he couldn't speak for hours. When he finally came to, all he said was, "There are voices in the sand." That same night, their tents were slashed open from the inside, but no one could explain how. The next morning, their footprints were gone, completely erased, while strange claw marks circled their camp. Khalid requested a transfer the next day. His co-worker, the one who peered into the well, quit and disappeared. Locals say there are Djinn in that part of the desert. Spirits made a smokeless fire that feed on lost souls. The Hitchhiker, Sonoran Desert, Arizona. If you're ever driving alone through the Sonoran Desert, don't stop, no matter what. It was late August, nearly midnight, when Mia, a 24-year-old college student from Phoenix, found herself driving back from Tucson after visiting a friend. Wanting to avoid the interstate traffic, she took an older back route, a stretch of desolate highway cutting through the heart of the Sonoran Desert. The road was long and empty, lined with cacti and scattered rocks. No lights, no cars, no signs of life. It was just Mia, her beat-up Honda Civic, and the dry wind scraping across the road. For the first hour, everything was fine. She had the windows cracked, music low, and kept her eyes on the yellow center line. But about 40 miles from Phoenix, her car started acting up. First, the temperature gauge spiked. Then the engine light blinked, followed by a strange clunking sound beneath the hood. She cursed under her breath. There was no cell service, no gas stations for at least 20 miles, and no buildings in sight. She pulled over to the shoulder, popped the hood, and stepped out into the warm desert night. The engine was hissing, steam curling up from the radiator. Mia knew a bit about cars, enough to recognize it was overheating. She unscrewed the cap to let it cool and leaned back, staring at the stars. That's when she felt it. A presence. She turned, slowly. About 50 feet behind her, in the faint glow of her taillights, stood a man, barefoot, ragged clothes, his face shadowed, his posture unnaturally stiff. And worst of all, he wasn't there a moment ago. He didn't say anything. He didn't move, just stared, heart pounding. Mia slammed the hood shut and rushed back into the car. She locked the doors, flicked on the headlights. He was still there, unmoving, expressionless. She tried to start the engine. Click, stall, click. The car wouldn't turn over. She muttered prayers under her breath, refusing to look up again. But she couldn't help it. She peeked in the rearview mirror. He was closer now, standing directly behind her trunk, still barefoot, still silent. Mia began to sob. She slammed her fist on the steering wheel, tried the ignition again, nothing, and then the engine started. On its own. Her hands weren't even on the keys. The dashboard lights lit up. The engine roared to life. Mia didn't wait. She threw the car into drive and floored it. Gravel sprayed behind her as she sped off into the night, the man vanishing into her mirror. For miles, she didn't stop. Not at signs, not at lights. She kept her eyes forward, only dared to glance into the rearview mirror once, and saw nothing but road. Relief started to creep in as the city lights of Phoenix appeared in the distance. Her breathing slowed. Her hands were still shaking, but she thought the worst was behind her. That's when the radio crackled to life. She hadn't touched it. Static filled the car for a moment. Then came a voice, low, gurgling, like it was bubbling up from underwater. "You left me. You shouldn't have." The voice sounded wet, hollow, not human. Mia screamed, yanked the dial, turned the radio off, and kept driving. She made it home just after 2:30 a.m. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a gated complex. She parked, ran upstairs, and double-locked her door. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every noise made her jump. But eventually, exhaustion won. For a few days, things felt normal, until the footsteps began. Every night around 2 a.m., the same time she'd seen him, she'd hear slow, deliberate footsteps outside her window. But that made no sense. She lived on the 3rd floor. She tried to explain it away. Maybe it was wind, maybe a raccoon on the roof. But deep down, she knew the sound of footsteps. Heavy ones, one after another, dragging slightly. After a week, she couldn't take it. She set up her phone on the windowsill to record. The first few nights showed nothing. But on the 4th night, she woke up around 2:10 a.m. and decided to look for herself. She pulled back the blinds just a crack and froze. Standing in the alley 3 stories below, directly under her window, was the same man. Barefoot, ragged, pale under the street lamp, head tilted back, staring straight up at her window. He didn't move. He didn't blink. She dropped the blinds and backed away, heart racing, hands shaking. The next morning, she reviewed her phone footage. But on the video, no one was there. No figure. No movement. Not even the sound of footsteps. Just silence. Since that night, Mia refuses to drive that road again. She moved out of her apartment a few months later, and now lives in a high-rise with no street-facing windows. Still, sometimes, she swears she hears static on the radio when she's alone in the car. And late at night, even on the 10th floor of her new building, she sometimes dreams of barefoot footsteps dragging slowly across her ceiling. The Whistler of Black Rock, Nevada Desert, USA. They say if you hear the whistle, it's already too late. That's the warning whispered among desert wanderers near Black Rock in Nevada. But Sam had never heard of it, at least not until it was too late. It was the fall of 2020, peak pandemic, when isolation became routine and the wild seemed like the safest place to be. Sam, a 34-year-old drone operator and aspiring filmmaker from Reno, decided to head out to the Black Rock Desert, hoping to capture a haunting time-lapse for his short horror film. The vast, cracked earth of the playa stretched for miles in every direction, offering the kind of eerie silence you only find where life dares not linger. He arrived just before dusk, set up his camp, and launched his drone to catch the last golden light bleeding into shadow. Hours passed, and by 10 p.m., only the stars remained above and the cold desert wind brushing against his tent. That's when he heard it, soft, deliberate, and impossible to mistake. For slow notes, like someone whistling a lullaby through clenched teeth, he paused, thinking it was just wind squeezing through the rocks or maybe something caught in the antenna. Then it came again, exactly the same notes, same rhythm, same unnatural clarity. It sounded too close, too clean. He stepped out of his tent and scanned the empty darkness. His flashlight revealed nothing but flat earth and scattered stones. He even launched a drone again, hoping the aerial camera would pick something up, but it showed only a blank desert. Unnerved but logical, Sam chalked it up to paranoia and began packing his gear. But as he started the SUV, the whistle returned, this time from the passenger side window, as if someone stood just inches away. He snapped his head to look. Nothing, only glass. No one there, but the sound had been real. Louder, colder. He floored the gas and tore down the rugged desert path, bouncing through uneven ground as clouds swallowed the stars. 10 minutes in, his drone controller, still connected to the vehicle's dash, lit up. A notification buzzed. Live feed active. Confused, he grabbed the screen. The drone was still flying, and it was no longer where he left it. The GPS said it was overhead, but then the thermal camera activated automatically. The feed showed Sam's SUV parked in the dark, and standing beside it, clear as day in that ghostly thermal vision, was a figure. Tall, gaunt, nearly skeletal. Cold enough to register as blue, nearly freezing against the desert's warm skin. Its arms hung awkwardly long, and its head cocked sideways like it was listening. The worst part? It was whistling. Sam felt his chest tighten. He shut the screen, flung the remote into the back seat, and drove until the desert turned to cracked asphalt and the lights of the nearest town flickered in the distance. He didn't stop, didn't sleep, just kept going. When he finally reached his apartment in Reno, he locked every door, pulled the blinds, and tried to forget. But later that night, 3:17 a.m., his phone lit up. A push notification from the drone app. Video saved to cloud. Against his better judgment, Sam tapped play. It was footage from earlier, his SUV filmed from above. At first, nothing, just a car. Then, slowly, from the bottom of the frame, the figure appeared again. It moved strangely, not like a person but like something mimicking one. Jerky, slow, deliberate. It circled the car, pausing at the windows, almost like it was inspecting him. Then it stopped, turned its head, looked directly into the drone camera, and waved. The wave was all wrong. Too slow, too stiff. The kind of motion that felt more like mockery than friendliness. Then the video ended. But Sam noticed something else. The timestamp. The video had been taken after he'd already left the area, meaning the drone had followed him, or worse, that the figure had. Sam deleted the app, sold the drone, told himself it was just a technical glitch. But nights didn't feel safe anymore. Shadows in the hallway seemed to stretch a little longer. Sounds from the kitchen echoed when they shouldn't. The final straw came a week later. Sam was brushing his teeth when he heard it again, for slow notes, perfectly identical to the desert whistle, echoing from just outside his bathroom. But when he looked out into the hallway, there was nothing. No wind, no explanation, only the same creeping dread. He moved apartments, changed his number, and abandoned filmmaking altogether. But still, every once in a while, when the night gets quiet and still, Sam hears it. That whistle, for notes, as if something out there is still waiting. Or worse, getting closer. Buried Eyes, Caver, Iran. In 2017, Lala, a 32-year-old documentary filmmaker from Tehran, set out on what she thought would be the project of a lifetime, an exploration into forgotten trade routes and lost history of the Silk Road, deep in Iran's Caver, also known as the Great Salt Desert. She had done months of research, marked ancient caravanserais on dusty maps, and hired a seasoned desert guide named Reza to help her navigate the vast, sun-bleached emptiness. The cavern was a place people rarely visited, and even more rarely returned from unchanged. It was dry, dead silent, and otherworldly, an endless white plain that seemed to erase time itself. On the second night of their journey, after hours of driving through nothing but salt and cracked earth, they pitched camp near the ruins of a collapsed caravan post. Just two stone walls barely standing, long abandoned and slowly being swallowed by the desert. The silence that night was unlike anything Lala had ever experienced. No wind, no insects, not even a hum of distant traffic. Just a stillness, so complete it felt unnatural. She and Reza shared a small fire and a quiet dinner, speaking in hushed tones without realizing it, as if afraid to wake something ancient that slept beneath the salt. Around midnight, Lala woke up suddenly, not from a sound, but from the absence of one. Then she heard it, whispering, soft, layered, and moving, like many voices speaking at once from different directions. She froze. It wasn't Reza. The voices were outside the tent, circling, speaking a language she couldn't place. It wasn't Persian or Arabic or anything remotely familiar. The words were dry and rasping, like sand grinding against old stone. Against her better judgment, she unzipped the flap and peeked out. But there was nothing, just moonlight bouncing off the endless salt flat. She closed the tent and tried to convince herself it was a dream. The next morning, Reza looked pale and anxious. He told her he'd had vivid nightmares, that something underground had been watching him in his sleep. Lala brushed it off with a nervous laugh, until they went exploring the area near the ruins and stumbled upon something that hadn't been there the day before. Carvings, hundreds of them, shallow impressions etched directly into the salt. Perfect human eyes, all staring upward. Some were crude and weather-worn, others looked freshly carved. All identical in size and shape, too precise to be natural, too many to be coincidence. Lala grabbed her DSLR and snapped dozens of photos. But when she checked the memory card later, every file was corrupted, not just the eye carvings, every photo from the trip, gone. That night, the whispering came back, louder, clearer. The language was faster now, like it was excited or angry. Reza sat up in his sleeping bag, staring at the roof of the tent as though he could see through it. He muttered something Lala didn't catch, then laid back down. Lala barely slept. At dawn, she woke to silence again. But this time, Reza was gone. His sleeping bag was still zipped untouched. His boots were neatly placed at the entrance of the tent. No footprints, no sign of struggle. Just gone. She called for him until her throat burned, walked circles around the camp, scanned the horizon. Nothing. No response. Nothing but her, and something else. Sitting directly on her pillow inside the tent was a small carving made of salt, perfectly smooth, shaped like a human eye. Panic set in. She grabbed the bare essentials, threw everything in her bag, and took off on foot, not knowing which direction to run, just needing to leave. She wandered for hours under the blistering sun, disoriented, dizzy, and hallucinating. She thought she saw figures moving at the edges of her vision, tall, robed silhouettes drifting across the salt, vanishing whenever she turned to face them. She collapsed sometime in the afternoon, too weak to continue. A desert convoy found her just before dusk, delirious and shaking, with cracked lips and sunburned skin. When they asked her what happened, she just whispered, "Reza gone, they took him." Days later, after being treated for dehydration in Yazd, she tried to recover the corrupted photos from her camera. Most were unrecoverable, but one, and only one, was partially salvaged. Blurry, dark, and washed in digital noise, but clear enough to see her tent, her backpack, her tripod, and all around the tent, dozens of small handprints pressed up from underneath the salt. Lala never released the documentary. She left filmmaking entirely. Some say she moved abroad. Others say she checks herself into private hospitals when the whispering returns. Locals who know the cavern say there are spirits buried there, merchants, slaves, travelers lost to the heat centuries ago, souls who never made it to their destination. Some believe they still live beneath the salt, watching, waiting, hungry for company. And carvings? They aren't art. They're warnings, eyes of the lost, markers of who's been taken, and who will be next. 6. The Bleeding Mirage, our desert, India. They say the desert plays tricks on your eyes, but in the dark desert, it plays tricks on your soul. In 2018, Akash, a 25-year-old travel vlogger from Mumbai, took a solo trip into the Dhar, chasing footage for a mystical documentary on desert folklore. Armed with a drone, a GoPro, and his trusty motorbike, he ventured off the beaten path, ignoring warnings from locals in Jaisalmer about mirages that bleed. A phrase he thought was just poetic exaggeration. But he would learn it was something far worse. On the third day of riding through the sun-scorched sand dunes, Akash found an unusual stretch of land, flat, glassy, and almost wet-looking, as if a lake had evaporated overnight. It shimmered unnaturally even under the overcast sky. He parked his bike and walked across it. The ground crunched beneath his boots, yet when he knelt to touch it, his fingers came up red. Not wet, not sticky, but red like dust mixed with something darker. He took out his camera, but as he tried to focus, the lens refused to adjust, like the desert itself didn't want to be captured. That night, he camped near a low hill to shield from the winds. Around 1 a.m., he woke up sweating, despite the cold. The air smelled like rust, not just a faint metallic scent, but thick and choking, like he was breathing inside an old iron tank. Then he heard it gurgling, like water moving underground. But this wasn't water. It sounded thick, heavy, like something being stirred. Against his better judgment, he stepped outside his tent. The desert wasn't dark. In fact, it was glowing. A deep red shimmer spread across the flat land, exactly where he'd walked earlier. It pulsed faintly, like it was alive. At the center of the glow stood a figure, head bowed, arms limp, feet sunken slightly into the earth. Akash called out. No answer. He walked forward, sand crunching louder than it should, echoing like footsteps in a tunnel. But when he got close, the figure vanished into the shimmer. Gone, as if it had never been there. The next morning, he checked his gear. His drone wouldn't power on. The GoPro had corrupted files. And worst of all, his motorbike's fuel tank was empty. He had filled it the day before. No leaks, no sign of theft. It was just gone, with no signal and no transport. He had no choice but to walk. As he climbed a nearby dune to get his bearings, he froze. The flat land from the day before now looked like a massive dried wound, cracked, red, sunken, and circular, almost too perfectly circular. And in the very center, a hole, not wide, but deep, like a mouth in the earth. Akash turned to head back to camp, but the footprints he'd left behind were already gone, smoothed over by something other than wind. Then the sun dimmed. It wasn't sunset. It was a shadow, spreading, moving above him. He looked up, and there it was, not a bird, not a cloud, a shape, shifting, unformed, like a massive jellyfish made of smoke, floating silently above the dunes. No wings, no sound, just presence. As if the desert itself had opened an eye to stare back at him, he ran. Hours passed. The sky changed colors, pink, orange, then black. He had no idea where he was. Then, just before he collapsed, he saw lights, headlights, a jeep. 2 shepherds found him, delirious and speaking in fragments. He kept mumbling. It was watching. It was bleeding. The ground was breathing. They thought he was hallucinating from dehydration. They gave him water and drove him back to the city. But here's where it gets strange. When he reviewed his corrupted GoPro files a week later, one video had partially recovered, just 12 seconds of shaky footage. In it, you can see the desert under moonlight, and in the distance, the red shimmer, just like he remembered. But then, for a split second, something steps into frame. Just legs, skinny, twisted, pale, barefoot, leaving behind prints filled with something dark. The screen flickers, then cuts to black. Akash never went back to the Dhar. He posted only part of the story on his YouTube channel, cutting out most of the horror. He said it was for dramatic effect. But in a podcast interview months later, his voice broke when asked what really happened. He said, "Mirages don't bleed, and the desert, it doesn't forget your footsteps." Locals believe there hides something ancient beneath its sands, something alive, a sleeping god, maybe, or a wound in the world that never healed. And sometimes, if you walk too far off the map, it wakes up. 7. The Laughing Pit, Namib Desert. Namibia, they say laughter is the music of joy, but in the Namib Desert, it's a warning. IN 2021, Daniel, an ecologist from South Africa, traveled deep into Namibia to study ancient desert flora that only bloomed once every decade. He was experienced, well-prepared, and guided by a local tracker named Mosi. Their destination was a remote area near the Skeleton Coast, where few dared to venture. Everything went smoothly for first 3 days. Harsh sun, cold nights, but nothing they couldn't handle. On the 4th day, they stumbled across something not marked on their map, a massive circular depression in the sand, about 30 feet wide, perfectly round and unusually deep. At first, Daniel thought it was a collapsed sinkhole, but the edges weren't crumbling. They were smooth, almost carved. Mosi froze when he saw it. He refused to go any closer, saying something in his native language that roughly translated to, "the place where voices fall." He begged Daniel to leave it alone. But Daniel, always a curious scientist, insisted on taking photos and samples. That night, while reviewing his images, Daniel heard it. Laughter. Not close, not loud, just faint giggling, rising with the wind. He assumed it was Mosi until he saw him. Mosi was asleep by the fire, snoring quietly. The laughter stopped. Then, just as Daniel laid down, it started again, louder, closer, almost childlike. He grabbed his flashlight and swept the dunes. Nothing, only the same eerie stillness that blanketed the desert every night. But just as he turned to go back inside the tent, the beam of light caught something. Footprints. Small, bare, leading directly away from their camp toward the pit. He didn't wake Mosi. He followed them as he neared the pit. The laughter stopped. The wind died. The air felt heavy, like something ancient was breathing beneath the sand. Daniel stood at the edge of the hole, heart racing. It was darker than it had been earlier, almost bottomless. Then, without warning, the laughter exploded, not faint now, but echoing from inside the pit. Layers of voices, children, women, men, all laughing in perfect unison. Not joyfully, but hollow, mocking. Daniel stumbled backward, but something caught his eye, just inside the rim of the pit. Hands, small, grayish, childlike hands pressed into the sand wall, as if trying to climb out, or pull something down. By the time he reached camp, Mosi was awake, visibly terrified. "You heard it," he whispered. "Didn't you?" Daniel nodded. Mosi simply said, "It found you now." At dawn, they packed up, but before leaving, Daniel looked back at the pit one last time. It was gone, and no depression. No footprints, just endless dunes, as if the desert had covered it up overnight. Back in Windhoek, Daniel tried to analyze his photos. Every image of the pit had been blurred, warped, like a heat haze had frozen on film. But one image remained intact. The very first photo he took, taken from the rim of the pit. At first glance, it seemed normal, but when he zoomed in on the shadows inside, there were faces, dozens of them, smiling, eyes hollow, all looking up. He never released the image that in the months that followed, Daniel began to change. Friends said he looked tired, distant. He stopped going out, stopped responding to calls. Then came the reports from his neighbors of laughter late at night, through the walls, through the vents, and always right before sunrise point one night, Daniel disappeared. His door was locked from the inside. His phone was still on the table. His camera was gone. But the only thing out of place was the sand. A thin layer of fine desert sand covering his floorboards, and a single footprint, bare, small, leading toward the window. Some say the Namib is haunted by the spirits of those who were sacrificed during ancient rituals, children taken to feed the sand. Others claim the pit is a gateway, not to hell, but something older, Something that doesn't want worship, only attention. And it lures you in the only way it knows how, by laughing to Tio this day. Local guides refuse to go near that region. They say the desert shifts, but the pit always finds a way to return. And if you ever hear laughter in the dunes, don't follow it, because whatever is laughing isn't human. Some say the desert is just sand and silence, but tonight, you heard the truth. These stories aren't fiction. They're warnings about what lies beneath the dunes, what watches from the ridges, and what follows you home. So next time you're driving alone at night, or you hear something in the wind that doesn't belong, remember these stories. Because in the desert, even the dead don't rest quietly. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. Drop a fire or desert in the comments if you survived all 7 stories. And let me know which one kept you up tonight. And hey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon, because next time we're going somewhere even darker. Sleep well if you can.